Hello, my name is David Turner and this is another Lunar Poetry Short. Today I'm in Bethnal Green in East London. I've again travelled all the way from South London. Anyway, I'm joined by the editor of Freedom News, Ella Harrison. Hello Ella.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. I think we should probably start, if we could, with you telling us a bit about the history of the Freedom Press, but more specifically Freedom Newspaper.
Well, Freedom Newspaper was founded in 1886 by Peter Kropotkin and Charlotte Wilson. It was founded as a journal of anarchist socialism and has been carrying on in various different forms ever since then. It's had several incarnations. For example, during the Spanish Civil War, it transformed into a pro-Republican paper. Spain and the World, and during the Second World War it was an anti-war publication. One of the more interesting aspects of the newspaper's history is the expelling of Peter Kropotkin as the editor during the First World War, because Peter Kropotkin is probably one of our most famous writers and proponents of anarchism, but he was a supporter of the First World War, supporter of the Allied forces, which was seen as incompatible with freedom and anarchist philosophy in general, and he was expelled. So last year was the centenary of the start of the First World War, and for us at Freedom it was also the centenary of chucking out our most famous editor. So yeah, it's existed in various forms throughout its history. It's been it stayed in publication as a newspaper for maybe the last nearly 140 years. It was closed down last year as a monthly printed paper that was running close to about 30 pages an issue. There were various reasons for closing it down that were explained in depth in our final publication, which was released in time for the Anarchist Book Fair last year, which was my first fully edited newspaper, which I did with my co-editor Adam Barr, and that was also the first time Freedom has properly featured poetry. So
yeah, and where is Freedom based?
Freedom is based in Freedom Bookshop in Whitechapel, which has been in its location since the 1960s, but is also, a bit like the paper, existed in various forms for a long time. The building is owned by Friends of Freedom Press, which is what's given it its ability to stay despite the kind of rapidly changing kind of market forces and gentrification forces in the area. So it's a bit of a relic, but a good relic of anarchism.
So why was it important to reintroduce a physical version of the newspaper with the Cornleaf Freesheet?
When we closed down the regular printed paper, there wasn't so much of an outcry, which I think was symptomatic of why it had to be closed down, because it was very expensive and it just wasn't getting its message across. But the most regular form of feedback we got from people and their disappointment at being closed down was not being able to have something physical to read and to transfer and to share. And freedom and anarchism in general often targets people who might be, say, slightly on the fringes of society, or who don't have regular access to the internet. And when we closed down, I became editor very soon after the paper was shut down. My primary concern was, how do we get this information, for example, to prisoners who we would regularly send every issue of Freedom to prisoners who had requested it, and it was fairly popular there, and it had a very good message. Freedom does a lot of work with legal support, for example. Freedom Bookshop acts as a kind of a stopgap often for people between their lawyers and after arrests on protests and things like that. There were lots of subscribers to the paper who had been involved in anarchism and had appreciated freedom for a long time, but who didn't really use computers, we still get letters, for example. People write us handwritten letters about the newspaper or requesting books. And that was my primary concern for getting maybe something physical, because I was aware that we were potentially alienating and excluding some of our most valuable readers, and the people who really relied on freedom, or it had been a part of their kind of political awareness for a very long time. And I would meet people and say, oh, I edit Freedom. They'd be very interested in it. It's a very old, long-running anarchist newspaper, and they would say, oh, do you have a copy? And I'd be like, oh no, but I can show you our website. And they'd be like, oh, is it only online? And I was always disappointed saying that, and people would always be disappointed that I couldn't give them a physical copy of the paper. And I felt that Freedom was so important and had such a strong historical basis that for it not to exist physically was a real shame, and that I felt as editor I owed it to the institution that I was fortunate enough to become a part of, to try and ensure its legacy somehow. And I think having the physical printed copies definitely does that. And
it's just a technical question, I suppose. Who prints Freedom? The Freesheet?
Freedom, the Freesheet and Freedom has always been printed since the 80s, very, very generously by Aldgate Press, who are linked with Freedom. They were founded partly with the help of Freedom Bookshop, so they have always printed Freedom for free. Part of our decision to close down the paper last year came from the fact that it was an incredibly large subsidy Aldgate Press were giving us, and we felt that it wasn't worth taking that from Aldgate. And they are now printing our Freesheet, which is only a single sheet and of a slightly smaller run. They're printing that for free as well, which is absolutely brilliant. And it's definitely taken a burden, I think, off Aldgate Press, although they never made it feel like a burden. But I think a lot of us on the Freedom Collective felt a responsibility towards making the most out of that subsidy.
I suppose if the newspaper wasn't reaching as many people as you would wish, it's not really worth the time for the press. If Aldgate Press can support you in a different way, it makes it a much better deal all round, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And now with the Freesheet, how it is now being printed and its distribution capabilities is an absolutely much better deal for Aldgate.
Because it must be much cheaper for you to spread it out and send it to people.
Exactly.
And as always with these conversations, poetry is never far away. So why was the decision taken to reintroduce poetry to the Freesheet? And actually, just to give it some context, when was the last time that poetry was printed in Freedom, in the newspaper?
Well, I don't know the last time poetry was printed in the newspaper, but I was aware when I became editor that previous editorial and layout decisions had been taken by people who were very against having poetry in the newspaper. And when I was put in charge of putting together the October edition along with my co-editor, we decided that to make our own mark on the paper, we would reintroduce poetry, because it had been such a deliberate decision to exclude it previously. And I've always appreciated poetry very much, and I think poetry is a fantastic way of expressing very nuanced and very individual political views. And I've been fortunate enough to be around many poets who write and perform extensively political pieces, and who put on events in support of say political organisations or causes. And I felt that I wanted Freedom to be a part of that, and to kind of give support both to these poets who are active within our political movements, and also to provide, I suppose, a break-up in the stories that we were providing in the newspaper, and to show the lots of different ways in which anarchism or broader left-wing views can be expressed. You don't just have to write an article explaining the long technicalities of anarchism, you can also write a poem that expresses, fears about what the state can do, or class solidarity. And I was fortunate enough to get some excellent poems in that paper that were the most popular aspect of our October edition.
Yeah, I was just about to ask how the poetry was received by your readers, and did you have much feedback?
Yeah, I was absolutely delighted with the feedback I got about the poetry. I think the single most popular thing in there was the Hoxton Market Forces poem by Tim Wells, or Oxton, as he would rather me pronounce it.
Yeah, as he always says, he remembers Oxton before the H went back on it. Yeah,
better without the H. Which was a fantastic poem about gentrification and about the ways in which changing class demographics alienate people. Done very wittily, done in a hugely relatable way. And I also had a poem by Grimship in there, which was a poem about class, and that was used next to the article about the Poor Doors protests by Class War, which were a long-running event in the second half of last year. And I finished the free sheet with a poem by Felix Henson, which was just a really great poem about the weekend, and that I really read and kind of related to, and thought, yeah, this is a bit like, you're working class, you're going out on the weekend, you're going out to have fun. I just really, really liked it, and that was also really popular because it wasn't explicitly political, but it was still relatable.
Yeah, I mentioned to a few people that I'd be speaking to you and talking about the free sheet, and every person so far has asked, do you only print left, or sort of broadly left-leaning poetry? But I suppose that isn't what the Freedom newspaper is about. It's not, because I think the point that's often lost, isn't it? People that are reading your paper, you've sort of won them round. You're not providing poetry to change their political beliefs. You're really just looking to print poetry that they can relate to, aren't you? Absolutely.
And to illustrate that, the first edition of the free sheet features another Tim Wells poem called The Winger, which is quite a nostalgic poem remembering a lad he played football with at school. And that's a part of lots and lots of people's growing up experiences, is playing football. Everyone has these kind of memories of people you knew, you wonder what happened to them, even though you still kind of live in the same areas, or in the same estates you might have grown up on, the same, schools you went to, you wonder what happened to these people. I read it and I thought about my experiences watching my friends play football. I never played football, nothing like that, but I enjoy, I'm a football fan, I like watching it, and I put it in the free sheet because I thought it's a really brilliant poem and it's really relatable. And not everyone might like football, but everyone remembers being at school, and I believe that if you take football out of the kind of horrendous corporate Premier League state it's in now, it's a working class sport. There's a lot of working class solidarity. In football, there's, in London at the moment, the Clapton FC are quite popular, and they're kind of, I think, trying to reclaim a bit of the class basis of football. So I felt that poem was really relevant, and I was really delighted.
Just have to mention for regular listener, Mishi, Dulwich Hamlet Football Club as well, they're doing a lot of work like that as well. It's really community based. It's not just about the game on a Saturday afternoon, it's all the stuff around it, and supporting local younger teams, and supporting teams that are down on their luck and trying to raise money, and I think that's the way football, well, all sport is represented on TV. It's sort of losing touch with what it was supposed to do originally, which was a sort of slightly more open air church feeling, and bringing people together. I was wondering actually, it's just popped into my mind actually, with the political climate the way it is, it's becoming a bit all consuming, especially if you are concerned, which thankfully a lot more people are becoming concerned. Do you think there's going to be more need for an escape in terms of, like, there was sort of early 80s and well, unfortunately probably the whole of bloody 80s, but you know, there was you know, a lot of music and art scenes grew out of the fact, you know, this whole thing of living for the weekend, you know, because it was pretty tough, you know, grinding through the week. And do you feel like in the newspaper, in the Freesheet, you're going to have to represent that a bit more as well?
I think so, yeah. I completely agree that there is definitely going to be a need for escape, but I think anything that encourages fight back rather than escape, right?
Yes,
people who want to escape from the very grim, well, the grim reality we already live in, and the even grimmer reality that it will be under 5 years of a majority Tory government. But I think that, well, the political poetry I hear and the political poetry that I read, you know, if you call it political poetry, but poetry with a political slant, is really inspiring. And I think that creativity is an absolutely essential and incredibly powerful tool. And I like to think as well, maybe going back to the 80s, yeah, this idea of living for the weekend, but also this idea of working class people getting together, creating their own culture, creating their own subcultures, defining their own music. I hope that happens, because I think it will be a real antidote to some of the more recent kind of, especially musical, I can't necessarily speak for the poetry world, but definitely kind of musically there's been explosions of kind of very middle class, very twee kind of music, and I'd like to see more, I'd like to see a return to a lot of what was being done in the 80s, because it's powerful and it encourages class solidarity, and it encourages, you know, people to get together and say, even if the government's trying to screw us over, we can't let them, you know, as long as you're always fighting, even if at times it might feel a bit hopeless, it's not hopeless as long as you keep fighting.
Yeah, I think in terms of poetry, I think we probably will see a return of a more critical voice, and the move away from this sort of slam influenced loving where everyone just goes and reads for 4 minutes and everybody pretends to love it
And
because
claps really politely.
We're all in the same space, whatever that means, you know. I'd like to see a little bit more grit. But
Absolutely.
that's my better not get into that. How can poets submit their work to Freedom?
Well, they can submit them directly to our editor's email address, but they can also send them to me personally. They can get in touch via our Facebook page as well. It's all very digital. But they can also send them into Freedom Bookshop. Yeah, if they wanted to send them handwritten.
It's sort of open-ended submission. You don't have themes, or you're just at the moment taking submissions. People
send and what we like and what we feel is relevant, and it doesn't have to be overtly political or overtly left-wing. That's always great. But I like Freedom to represent a much broader spectrum than just hardcore, ultra left-wing anarchism, because anarchism is much broader than that. And Freedom is very fortunate in its unique position, where I think it has a lot of sway, I think, and it's a big name in the anarchist movement. It's Freedom as a bookshop and as a space, I think, has often been treated as a kind of a meeting place for anarchists, and I'd like to think that the newspaper itself can be a meeting place, but for ideas and for people's creativity in a way that fits in with a non-hierarchical anarchist message, but doesn't have to be, you know, based entirely on anarchist theory or a set criteria of this is what being left-wing is about, or this is what being anarchist is about, because that's not how it works, and that's not how I want Freedom to operate.
And how can people get hold of the Freesheet?
Well, they can pick it up from Freedom Bookshop. It can also be requested via the same means of submission to be sent out. It will be sent out around the country to various bookshops for stocking. It's currently available from Hydra in Bristol at the moment. So it will be available to pick up from other bookshops. But one of the easiest ways, if you really want to get hold of one, is just to get in touch, and then we can send them out. we're happy to do that, especially if people want them in bulk as well to give out. I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of demos and protests, and part of why it was brought back as a free sheet is because we don't have to charge. The newspaper was charged before, it cost £2. This way it can be given out and taken, and people don't have to worry about it. It can just be left anywhere, or even if people take it and end up not even looking at it and throwing it away, at least it's still getting out there. So
yeah. And what is the website for Freedom?
The website is freedomnews.org.uk, and that is the specifically news website. There's also the freedompress.org.uk, which is the Bookshop's website, and people can purchase the Bookshop's books from there. But for the news website, it's Freedom News.
Yeah, I'll put both of those in the description below this thing, what you are listening to now. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ella.
Thank you very much.
Everyone should check out Freedom. It's great. And everyone request some free sheets and then leave them dotted about everywhere.
Please do.
Spread the word.
Please do.
Thank you, Ella.
Thank you very much.